Want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Welcome to Juice & Co with me, Emily Carver. I am standing in for Michelle again this evening. Now, we have got another jam-packed show for you this evening. I want to kick off with asking you what you make of Labour's latest ad campaign. They've been accused of dog whistle politics. They've essentially claimed that Rishi Sunak doesn't want to see paedophiles, convicted paedophiles, locked up in prison. What do you make of that? Is that just how political campaigning goes? It gets a bit rough, doesn't it? Then I want to talk about, is Britain an appalling country to have children in? This is because Camilla Tominey, our fellow GB News presenter, has said in a column that Britain is not a good place to raise children anymore. What do you think about that? And should workers be able to sue their bosses if customers are rude? A change in the law could be about to happen on that one. So if a customer is rude to you as an employee, should you be able to sue your boss for not looking after you enough? And finally, an Easter theme to this one. Charity donations. Do you think you should keep them to yourselves, or should you put them all over social media? One Tory MP has done exactly that. Let me know what you think. All of that to come tonight on Juice & Co. With me, Emily Carver, sitting in for Michelle Dewbs. But first, let's get the latest news headlines from Bethany Elsey.
Emily, thank you. I am Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Opposition politicians in Scotland are urging the SNP to be fully transparent about its finances after it emerged the firm which audits the party's accounts has resigned. Johnston Carmichael says it made the decision after reviewing its client portfolio. Earlier this week, the former SNP chief executive, Peter Murrell, who is Nicola Sturgeon's husband, was arrested by police investigating the party's finances. He was released without charge pending further investigation. Russia has charged a US journalist with espionage. Evan Gershkovich, who works for the Wall Street Journal, is accused of trying to obtain Russian military secrets on behalf of Washington. He pleaded not guilty earlier this week and maintains he was working as a journalist. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says he was caught red-handed, but President Joe Biden has described the claims of espionage as ridiculous and demanded his release. Police in Northern Ireland are warning their officers could be targeted by dissidents in Londonderry this Easter. That's ahead of a state visit by the US President, who's arriving in Belfast on Tuesday. The PSNI says it's received strong intelligence that attacks are being planned for Bank Holiday Monday. MI5 raised the terrorism threat level in the country to severe following the shooting of a senior detective, John Caldwell. The Labour Party has stood by an advert that claims Rishi Sunak doesn't think child sex abusers should go to prison. Labour posted the ad on Twitter, pitching itself as the party of law and order. But it's drawn criticism from MPs, with senior Tory ministers accusing Labour of a vile and desperate attempt at campaigning. But Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the PM should take responsibility.
The digital graphic that's based on, it's like a skit if you like, or a take on the types of graphics that the Prime Minister himself produces about his own policies, and he's become famous for producing these kind of graphics. And so it's a take on that. If it's personal in the sense that he's the guy who runs the country, he is the Prime Minister, and the book does stop with him.
A 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a 14-year-old girl died in a fire at a block of flats in East London yesterday. The girl, named locally as Tiffany, died at the scene and 5 others were injured but have since been discharged from hospital. Emergency services were called to the blaze in Newham at around 5:30 p.m. It's being investigated as suspected arson. A 12-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a woman who died after being hit by a car in Sheffield. 60-year-old Marcia Grant was hit by the car in the Greenhill area on Wednesday evening. South Yorkshire Police says the boy, who cannot be named for legal reasons, will appear before Sheffield Youth Court tomorrow. 2 million British holidaymakers are expected to head overseas this Easter weekend. Meanwhile, the Port of Dover is warning those travelling could face 2-hour delays. Ferry operator DFDS urged travellers to allow for extra time to get through border control and check-in. Delays have been blamed on French officials carrying out extra checks, as well as stamping UK passports following Brexit. 2 Israeli women have been shot in an attack on their car in the occupied West Bank, following a day of violence along the Lebanese and Gaza borders. An Israeli army video shows explosions on Hamas weapon production sites and tunnels in retaliation for rocket attacks it blamed on the Islamist group. It comes amid mounting confrontation in Jerusalem during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, as well as the Jewish Passover holiday. The UK has appealed for de-escalation, with the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly saying both sides should negotiate. S Club 7's Paul Cattermole has passed away, aged 46, only weeks after the pop group announced a comeback tour. In a statement issued by the family and the group, it said there are no words to describe their deep sadness. He was found yesterday at his home in Dorset. Police say his death is not being treated as suspicious. The band had hits in the 2000s, including Bring It All Back and Reach. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Bethany. Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now, joining me tonight on Good Friday, the evening, Good Friday, my panel, Alex Dean, a political commentator, of course, and Paul Embry, a firefighter and writer. I got a couple of messages saying you two are their favourite pair.
That's very nice.
So perhaps others agree. Let me know. You like these two. That's what people are saying.
I think that was our parents probably messaging in, brothers and sisters.
Who's your mum, brothers, sisters? Yeah. Well, people are feeling, kind. They like you too.
So let's see.
The Easter spirit.
Let's see if we can have some fiery debate. Who knows? You can get in touch with us about all of the topics we want to discuss today. I want to know what you think, firstly, about Labour's attack on Sunak. It does seem to be a rather tasteless campaign, suggesting that Rishi Sunak doesn't want to see convicted paedophiles in prison. I mean, it is just absolutely ludicrous, and even the left are saying it is hideous, tasteless, and doesn't belong in British politics. Let me know what you think. We're also going to be talking about whether Britain has become an appalling country to raise children. That's because Camilla Tominey, who is a GB News presenter, of course, she wrote an article. It was a very good article, actually. She wrote about how there's gender extremism in schools, there's horrible, nasty social media content that is making children depressed, crime on our streets, all sorts, really. A bit of an attack, but perhaps there's some truth to that. We'll debate that, of course. Lots more to come, but please do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk or on Twitter @GBNews. So, yes, our first topic, Labour is on a mission to bring down Rishi Sunak, it seems, with their new social media campaign. 2 days into the row, the Prime Minister's picture has been featured on Labour's social media accounts. The ad accuses him of not wanting convicted paedophiles to be locked up in prison. Yesterday's tweet says, "Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't," and then features the PM's signature. Today, with the same photograph, they've doubled down. The poster asks, "Do you think an adult convicted of possessing a gun with intent to harm should go to prison?" before again answering, "Rishi Sunak doesn't," complete with his signature once again. So, Alex, let's start with you. Let's just get your view on this, really.
Look, the traditional view is politics is a contact sport. Everyone has a go at one another. People go negative in campaigns. That's just the nature of the game. The difference here is that the Labour Party of late, notwithstanding having a deputy leader who goes around calling everyone scum at the drop of a hat and having lots of members who say how much they hate Tories, hate, of course, being a famously successful election strategy, has taken on a mantle of kind of moral superiority in the mood of, they go low, we go high. That sort of tradition of the high ground.
Michelle Obama.
Exactly. It doesn't fit at all with that tone. And I don't think it fits with the tone that Starmer has tried to adopt of the more grave, serious man for serious times approach. And that's why it feels a bit jarring. But the real reason I think it's a mistake, nobody needs to feel sorry for Rishi Sunak. He's the Prime Minister of the country. He's doing a big job. People are going to have a go from time to time. The opposition may get it wrong or not. I'm not asking for sympathy for him. The reason I think it's a mistake is that I think it shows the Labour Party is a bit rattled. If you believe they were streets ahead, if you believed where some of the more extreme polls have been that said you're guaranteed to win the next election, all of their advisors would be saying, do nothing, play low target, don't rock the boat, stay on course, we're going to win. I think they've been looking at the preferred Prime Minister polling, which has Sunak a little bit to a lot ahead, depending on which one you look at. And I think it shows they're concerned about Sunak's standing. So for me, this shows Labour looking a little bit weak.
Yes, I think there is certainly some truth to that. I think it does actually show them looking a bit rattled. Paul, what do you think? Just going back to the ad itself, what it said, what it accused Rishi Sunak of.
It was silly. I mean, there's no question about it. I'm a Labour Party person, but it was silly. I don't think the British people, by and large, like this kind of negative campaigning. I think it's the sort of campaigning that we've become used to seeing over the years in the United States. But I don't think that kind of personalised negative attack is something that we necessarily see a lot of here. And I don't think it particularly resonates with the public. I don't think it goes down.
It's a bit American, isn't
it? But it's very American. And I think what people do is they look at this kind of personalised, yah-boo, playground, call-in names kind of politics, and they are generally, I think, switched off by it because they think, look, this doesn't really resonate with me and my life and my stresses and strains and the issues that are vexing me at the moment. If you're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, if the economy's failing, if people can't get on the housing ladder, they can't get their operation on the NHS or get in to see their GP. Those are the sorts of things that people want their politicians to be discussing and arguing about and debating. When it comes to stuff like this, I think it's a big turn-off now. I mean, it may be what Alex says. It may be because the Labour Party is rattled. It may be just the particular advertising executive got a bit carried away. But it's wrong. I think it's a misstep by the Labour Party. Having said that, it will be lost in the winds of time in a few days.
It's interesting that they haven't bothered to take it down. They clearly think they're going to stick to this.
That is interesting.
Stick to this campaign tactic.
I have to say, by the way, I have some admiration.
You respect that?
Yeah.
Well, I have some.
I wouldn't take it down.
No,
you've got to keep it there. You've done it.
Once you take it down, you've admitted you've got it wrong.
It's the old thing, isn't it? Never apologise, never explain, and that kind of thing. And I think somebody has probably said, look, we're being hammered for it anyway. All we're going to do is have
you might as well leave it up.
If we take it down, we might as well ride it out. So on that part, I have some respect, especially in this day and age where people are so quick to apologise and withdraw.
I'm somewhere between the two views that you've set up because I think there is room in politics for criticising a government's record or what you perceive as being its record, even very aggressively. The mistake they made is the personalising part. And if the approach, and it may make a less catchy poster, but if the approach had been, Sunak's government has let X many sexual offenders out onto the streets, it would land the same message without saying, rhetorically, Rishi Sunak doesn't think paedophiles should go to prison. Now, as a matter of fact, I don't believe Rishi Sunak has sympathy to paedophiles. Moreover, none of us actually think the Labour Party believes Rishi Sunak's got any sympathy for paedophiles.
No one's pro-sexual assault of children.
And that's the absurdity, right? If they'd looked at it as a government record and said, this is what we claim to be the shortcoming of government, it would have been a powerful campaign, I think. The mistake, which they thought was clever, was personalising it and trying to ping it to the Prime Minister. That's why it's backfired.
It opens them up to scrutiny, and people have pointed out that Keir Starmer did sit on the Sentencing Council.
Well, he didn't prosecute Jimmy Savile and got very upset when that was pointed out.
And that was, of course, criticised at the time as a party attack line from the Conservatives. And he was sitting on the Sentencing Council 2 years before Rishi Sunak even became an MP. Well, so a lot of this predates.
There's no more of a straight line between Rishi Sunak and the fact that some people who have sexually assaulted children don't go to prison than there was between Keir Starmer and the fact that Jimmy Savile wasn't prosecuted. So that's a danger for the Labour Party. You know, they reared up against any suggestion that Keir Starmer, as the head of the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, was somehow responsible for Jimmy Savile not being prosecuted. Well, if you're going to play that game, people are going to now point the finger at you for making essentially the same kind of accusation against Rishi Sunak.
The difference is that with the decision to go ahead or not with the prosecution of a high-profile celebrity, it's much more likely that, I'm not saying Starmer was at all, but it's much more likely, at least, that the Director of Public Prosecutions was involved, that it went across his desk for approval as to whether or not to go ahead. Rishi Sunak is not sitting in number 10, signing off on the imprisonment or not of sexual offenders.
I don't think there is any evidence that Starmer...
I'm saying in your comparison, which is more likely?
Yeah.
It's plainly more likely the DPP is involved in the prosecution of a high-profile person.
From my memory, Rishi Sunak was never within the Justice Ministry nor the Home Office or anything that would be in charge of sentencing.
We saw on your channel earlier an interview with a leading Labour figure saying the reason it's been personalised is that he's the man in charge and in the end the buck stops there. People will make up their own minds whether or not it's overreach from Labour. The mood from most people seems to be it is overreach. But personally, I think I'm a bit more sympathetic to Labour than you are on this, in that I think there is room in public discourse for robust criticism of government records. I actually don't think
I agree with that. I agree. I mean,
it's the way they've done it.
Absolutely, governments are fair game, and Prime Minister's a fair game. I'm not suggesting that, but I think when the public deems that it's a personalised attack, not necessarily on the person's record, but and clearly this wasn't on Sunak's record because he isn't responsible for the things that Labour accused him of, where you're just trying to attack the person in a negative sense and personalising it in that direct way. I think that's what turns people off. Tony Benn always used to say, "Never wrestle with a chimney sweep," and what he was essentially saying is don't fight dirty in politics, because if you do, because someone else is doing it to you, if you wrestle with them, you're going to get dirty.
It's a great expression.
But that is a great expression. It's also quite interesting. I was having a little browse of the Labour Party's social media accounts, looking at their Facebook, for example. It is all crime. They are going crime, crime, crime. We are tough on crime. Why are they doing this, Alex? Well,
I think there's two reasons. One, the Conservative Party has traditionally been viewed as the party of law and order. They're trying to defang that. And two, given it's Keir Starmer's background, and they'll presumably have seen some polling seeing they've gone ahead of their traditional position on law and order, they're trying to double down on that. And they think this is the message for them at the local elections, both to defang the Tory message on law and order and push their own position, which is apparently polling they must have seen, saying they're doing quite well. It does make sense to have a disciplined campaign. It does make sense to try and focus your efforts on something. And actually, if you think about the sclerotic nature of the Corbyn era, this is just viewing campaigns in a more kind of at one remove. It's a demonstration of how far the Labour Party's come, that they can exercise this kind of message discipline and stay on target. Now, on this example, it's had a bit of blowback because of the silliness of the posters they've done. But they're campaigning pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it is very interesting because a lot of members within the Labour Party would want a softer on-crime approach, a different approach, a less concentration on sentencing and banging people up and more on rehabilitation and, you know, cost of living, more centres, youth centres, that sort of thing.
Well, trust me, Emily, as someone inside the Labour Party and active in the Labour movement for many years, there will be many people in the Labour Party incandescent at this type of campaign. I mean, these are the sort of people, don't forget, who, when Starmer, shortly after he took over and he gave a couple of speeches in front of the Union Jack, accused him of embracing fascism. You know,
it's our own flag.
Some sort of far-right leader because he was standing in front of our own nation's flag when he was giving a speech.
The trouble is, it's people of the traditional left, I may say, like yourself, that this messaging is aimed at by Starmer, who have been so neglected by Labour leadership in recent times with their woke kind of literati agenda, instead of listening to their traditional grassroots, because the traditional Labour grassroots are very up for a law and order campaign.
Well, the reality is Labour were annihilated at the 2019 election and have been losing the working class vote in this country for many years. And it didn't start with Corbyn, by the way. It goes back to some years before Corbyn, because they completely alienated working class voters. And whereas working class voters were interested in things like, you know, the economy and job security and national security and having strong borders and law and order and that kind of thing, Labour looked upon those sorts of people as if they were embarrassing elderly relatives. They didn't share those priorities. They thought they were sort of uncouth and reactionary. And what Starmer has understood is that in order to win back the hearts and minds of those people, you've got to start speaking their language.
I can't help but think it's all... He's essentially just trying to appeal to whoever he can, and he doesn't believe what he's saying. I think a lot of people wouldn't trust him on crime necessarily, despite his previous position.
Well, there's always a difference between the rhetoric and the reality in terms of delivery. And my fear for the Labour Party is, look, you can send all the right messaging about law and order and fighting crime, but unless you are prepared to do the really radical, fundamental things that are necessary in this country to make it safer...
You know what the Tories are going to do? They're going to be posting that picture of Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner on their knee.
Yes.
Which will rather diminish, distract from their new crime
You've got one, on the one
campaign.
On the one hand, you've really got a point, because the kind of people you appeal to with this message, especially on the traditional left, are precisely the kind of people who found Labour's messaging on immigration, whatever you think of it more broadly, quite repellent. That their own views about protecting our borders and trying to stop illegal immigration to this country and a relatively unsympathetic perspective on asylum seeking and refugees coming to the United Kingdom. Though that very same cohort want a strong message on law and order and will find themselves asking, well, given that I don't like your messaging on immigration and don't believe in it, do I actually believe it when you say these things about crime? On the other hand, and I haven't seen this, but I suspect that people who are exercised about law and order are more likely to vote at local elections than the population at large. I bet you there's some polling out there.
Yeah, that's probably true.
That says people who care about this kind of issue vote at locals. I doubt very much you'll see a big focus on crime come the general election.
Yeah.
I think this is a focus for now.
Yes, the antisocial behaviour, the petty crime, but they are going sexual assault and all of that.
The truth is that law and order has
always
been a working class issue, because crime affects working class communities more than anyone else. Middle class communities.
Very much
Labour
so.
forgot
But it also affects Labour-run councils more than Conservative-run councils, but perhaps that's demographics. From you at home, lots of people have been getting in touch. It seems that there are lots of opinions on this. Karen says, I am disgusted. Keir Starmer, who shouldn't be called Sir, she says, should be thrown out of politics altogether. Perhaps that's a bit harsh, but strong stuff. Mark says, great British politics today is in desperate trouble, not the Conservative government. The Labour Party corruption must be smashed. And Chris says, the nasty party. Labour have surely taken over this mantle. Well, a lot of people on the left, a lot of Labour commentators and MPs, I think, have also said similar. So there you go. Not many people are impressed with this particular ad campaign. But it's got us talking about Labour, hasn't it? And perhaps that's the point. But coming up, are you worried about raising your kids in Britain today? With gender extremism in schools, crime on the streets, malicious content on the internet, I'll be asking my panel, is Britain a bad country to bring children up in. Stay tuned.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Right, big question. Is Britain becoming an appalling country? At least when it comes to raising children. We're always seeing headlines saying that Britain isn't the best country to bring up children, childcare costs, etc., but also extremism in sex education taught in schools, increasing crime, street crime, violent crime. Children have easy access to inappropriate content on the internet. So, is anything going in the right direction? Is Britain just all doom and gloom? Should we move to other countries to raise our children? Has it got that bad? Or, are you sick of people talking down our country? Paul, you've got strong feelings on this.
Well, I mean, look, the truth is I think we are a nation in decline. I think we need to be absolutely honest about that. I think social mobility, for example, is now in reverse. I think we've got a political class that is distinctly mediocre compared to our political establishments of many years ago. Whether you agreed with them or not, they were people with gravitas and intelligence. I think by and large today, many MPs, even though I think most of them are fundamentally decent people and work hard, I think are distinctly average. And the truth is, look, nothing really works properly. If you look around the country today, I've said before, it's almost got the kind of feel of the last days of Pompeii about the whole thing, where things just seem to be slowly falling apart. The police don't do their job.
I can hear everyone at home opening up another bottle of wine at this rate. Misery guts, Paul.
And getting the
miserable.
Getting the revolver.
Well, I was going to say slitting their wrists, but that was a bit. I thought that'd be a bit far.
Things don't work. You know, the police don't do their job. The NHS is falling apart. You have to wait goodness knows how long to get a GP's appointment. The economy is in crisis, and I think that, you know, by and large, people kind of sense that we are not the power that we were, and that there's an element of real decline about the country, and it's sad, but it's true.
Now, I am asking this. I'll let you come back to that, Alex. I'm hoping you might be a little bit more optimistic about the future, because, you know, I do intend at some point to bring some children into the world.
I'm going to be more negative.
I don't want to have to move to another country before I decide to have children.
Government. Let's get a Labour government.
A Labour government isn't going to solve it, is it?
You're expecting more negative than Paul. Have your first on-air suicide at GBNews. What's the point?
I'll remind our viewers why...
That's why I'm doing it. I'm trying to tee you up, Alex.
I'll remind our viewers why we're talking about this, because Camilla Tominey, a fellow GB News presenter, wrote a column about how Britain is becoming an appalling place to raise children. Now, she was focusing on mostly the confusion in schools.
Yeah.
Ideological indoctrination that she sees it to be, particularly over gender. But also she threw in things like crime and so on.
I am an admirer of Camilla's work. I think she's a great writer, and I think she writes bravely and extremely well. But I'm afraid I disagree with her on this question. And it's not just because I'm a tub-thumping patriot, although I do happen to think this is a great country and a great country to live in and a great country in which to bring up children. I do concede that some of the things she's talking about are real issues in schools. I mean, could our schools do better? Well, on the league table performance compared with our international rivals, British schools do well. Both in the state and private sector, albeit we've fallen behind some countries, especially in Asia, where once traditionally behind us in attainment levels, people, whether it be on basic achievement or high-level achievement, have surged past us as their economies have become more wealthy. So our performance educationally is still pretty good, but not all that it could be, but nothing like the kind of doom and gloom that narrative might suggest. On the things she's talking about, I absolutely accept that there is something quite wrong. If you run the risk of sending your child to a school where, for example, they get told about transgenderism far earlier than you would like them to be, and the school doesn't tell you as the parent they're going to do it, and then get encouraged to change their gender themselves, and that is facilitated by the school, again, without telling you about it. So I accept that premise that things are less than ideal in our schools, but those things can be dealt with and improved. And I think as a country, our best days are still ahead of us. I have a completely different mindset to Paul, and that extends to our educational circumstances too. In Britain, we gave a great deal of support to our education system, whether or not, like myself, we are childless. We rightly think that is part of our contribution to our country and our future generations. And I think we'll continue to do so. I think this is a phase, right? I think we've gone beyond peak woke already. I think we're going to grow out of it, basically. And I think part of the reflection of our coming into national adulthood will be shrugging this off, and our educational system will be all the better for it.
Well, I hope so, but a lot of children going through the current education system may well not want to have children because of the climate alarmism, Paul. I mean, if you speak to, the Just Stop Oil activists, of course, they say, oh, we're not going to have children because we don't know whether the planet will be in a good enough condition. But this trickles down into your average school child constantly worried that the world is going to end or that everything they do has a negative impact.
It does, and I'm a patriot, by the way, and many things.
I didn't mean to imply.
We don't have a flag.
I didn't mean to imply that you were.
I know you didn't, but there are many things about this country that I admire and love. But I'm just realistic. I think about the future of the country. I think that the political class in this country and our kind of institutions, our academic institutions, large parts of our media, have kind of embraced this liberal progressive, this radical liberal progressive agenda. They've embraced the precepts of liberal globalisation, the global market, open borders, all of this kind of thing, which I think has actually caused an enormous amount of fragmentation within our country, a degree of atomisation of our societies where, people living in the same communities 20 or 30 years ago, people would know their neighbours. Nowadays, it's not uncommon at all for people not to know anybody.
It would have been incredibly difficult and damaging economically to have said, no, we're not going to liberalise in terms of trade.
No,
we're going to protect our industries to the nth degree.
I don't believe so.
In a globalised world,
no,
people can move around more easily.
I think the opposite. And I mean, I'm not calling for some sort of autarky here, but I do think that actually when you look at the liberalisation of trade and what it's done in terms of the deindustrialisation of Britain and the offshoring of thousands and thousands of blue-collar jobs in stable industries, what that has done to communities in terms of their people's sense of belonging and their sense of place and their sense of vocation, what that's done to the economy.
You're very nostalgic, Paul, whereas Alex is looking towards the future.
What's it done to our economy?
May I just say something very quickly? Gordon has got in touch, and this is kind of a point to Paul, but Alex, I'll come to you as well. Why is it that if Britain is so bad and hard, 3 million Brits can afford to go on holiday this Easter? I do think that sometimes we do sensationalise just how miserable everything is, when most people, you know, yes, people are struggling at the moment. Yes, there is a cost of living crisis. Yes, there are some people who are privileged compared to others. Of course, that is the case. But in terms of looking around the world, you're pretty lucky if you happen to be born in Britain.
For the moment.
For the moment.
Look, it may, you are both, I'm sure, people of broader vision than me, but I'm still trying to answer the exam question about schools. And
sorry, I've moved off topic. Bring me back.
My narrow view on that is if there is real ground for criticism, it's that in our educational establishment, which there may be a wider point about the broader political and liberal establishment, has allowed itself to be captured by a very, very small group of extremists who say, unless you agree with me, you are a bigot, which is a very kind of obvious sleight of hand, saying unless you accept that there is no such thing as a defined pair of sexes anymore, then you're a bigot. If you refuse to use this child's chosen pronouns this week, then you'll be fired as a teacher, right? That sort of thing in almost any culture would be dismissed. You try that on a Latin American culture, you try that in France or Spain, they'll tell you to get knotted, right? That is a sign of weakness. I concede that on that one point. I was trying to think about a point of agreement. I agree that that is a sign of cultural weakness, that we've allowed ourselves to be kowtowed and bullied into something that not just the mainstream, 99.5% of us know is complete guff.
Well, I think I would certainly agree with that. I put out what I thought was a common sense tweet saying, if I were a parent, I would like to know if my son Sam was showing up at school as Samantha. The tweet went viral. I have never had so much abuse in my life. It was captured mostly, by the way, by Americans, actually.
Twitter is not normal life.
Who accused me, told me I should never have children, I should be sterilised. You know, if my child can't come to me, then I'm a hideous person. Terrible, terrible, terrible. But what do? I mean, all I can do is hope that the general public would be on my side. I think I'm speaking for them when I say that. But yes, I'll give you the final word on this one.
Final word, I think economically we're going backwards. I think socially we've become a very kind of deracinated society. Culturally, it's almost as if we're ashamed of our past. I think our communities are
So bring children into the world?
Well, I would never say no, but it's going to take a hell of a lot to retrieve it. It can be done, but don't underestimate the task.
Well, perhaps it will be future generations that make Britain great again.
Oh, God.
We shall see. Anyway, coming up, should workers be able to sue their bosses, if customers are rude to them? A new change in the Equality Act would let workers take employers to court if a member of the public offended or harassed them at work. Is that right? Is that fair? Stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. So keeping me company until 7 o'clock, we still have Alex Dean in the studio, political commentator, and Paul Embry, firefighter and writer. So are you planning on a few drinks out this bank holiday weekend? It's quite nice weather actually down here at least. Get the jokes with the friends in while you can. A new amendment to the Equality Act would let workers take employers to court if a member of the public offended or harassed them at work. Some people are saying that this could be, you know, banter. Banter could be under this kind of law. Landlords have warned the new bill could mean they have to hire banter bouncers to stop people joking in pubs in case it upsets staff. Is that a bit silly, Alex?
I am regularly called variations on Tory toady when I'm on the show and others, so I will tell you, I disagree with the government on this one. I think this is a stage too far. I think that if somebody harasses you, which is a criminal offence, then you should have recourse to the laws as they stand rather than creating new ones. And this kind of halfway house where it's now your employer's responsibility, it's not the person who's harassed you, a criminal offence, to be held accountable in a court of law. It's your employer against whom you're going to bring a civil claim, I assume, and get some kind of financial remedy. For me, that seems perverse. It also seems a disincentive anymore, given how keen sometimes our police are to avoid doing things that we would like them to do in order to go away and do things that most of in society would rather they didn't do. It's become very easy for the police to say, I'm not going to enforce this kind of activity when someone's harassed you. You take your employer to court. That'll take care of it. Doesn't need me to investigate at all, does it?
Yeah.
So actually, it forces something. It makes a new thing that's neither one thing nor the other. And in law, that's generally a bad idea.
But what if I was a worker in a pub? I was working behind the bar, and the same person kept coming in to the pub, and every single time they were, I don't know, horribly suggestive, rude, vulgar, harassing me. But the landlord of the pub just said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Get on with it."
Let me answer it directly. If that person is harassing you to the extent that you are being harassed, it is an offence. Short of that, I'm afraid what you're describing is somebody being annoying. And somebody being annoying in society is part of life. It's part of the warp and weft of having neighbours you don't like, customers that might smell, people that talk about things that wind you up, the boring Terry who always goes on about the route to drive to Birmingham, like whatever. People are annoying, right? And it may be if a certain kind of particular annoying person who's targeted at you, most people's and it all comes down to pubs for some reason in this conversation, most pubs will bar them.
It's the picture on the TV.
Or say, Barry, pull your head in, leave Emily alone, right? And that's the way it results. The idea you're going to improve your circumstances by suing your employer in the example you've given seems to me to be for the birds.
Well, there we go. Should a GP be able to sue the NHS, Paul, if they're not dealing with abusive patients?
Well, look, I mean, under the Equality Act now, people can sue their employer for harassment if a fellow worker discriminates against them. And what this legislation, which I don't think is quite as kind of snowflakey as people are making it out to be, seeks to do is just extend that to third parties. Now, what the law will say, assuming it goes through, is that an employer is required to take all reasonable steps to prevent that harassment. If an employer has done that, then it seems unlikely that they're going to be captured by the legislation. And the truth is, look, in the scenario that you mentioned there about working in the pub, Emily, I would say, actually, if your employer, if you were working behind the bar and suffering that sort of daily or nightly harassment, and your employer was fully aware of that but didn't take reasonable steps to stop it, then actually I do think it's fair to hold that employer to account for the impact that it's having on you. So I don't necessarily think it's unreasonable. I don't want to wrap workers in cotton wool, and I don't want them, you know, to be told they mustn't be exposed to particular opinions. But I know the government has come forward with an amendment saying that if people are having a genuine discussion and someone in the workplace expresses a genuinely held kind of political or moral opinion, then that isn't something that's going to be captured by the legislation.
Well, it's going to be very difficult.
How reassuring.
I do worry.
Well, no,
Sceptical over here.
I get that. I do get it completely because I'm a passionate defender of free speech. But at the same time, I don't want a situation where people in the scenario, for example, like Emily raised, feel they have to go into work and suffer abuse and harassment because their employer has not done anything about it.
They could actually resign from the job, dare I say that.
But they shouldn't
or
have
they
to.
could approach the police to say that this punter is actually harassing me.
For all that we have pubs with many annoying customers, and Lord knows that's going to be true up and down the country, and who amongst us has not been an annoying customer of a pub at some point in his or her life?
Never.
Right, of course, you are the sole exception. Let's say Patrick then.
I'm sure he has.
But what my point was going to be, no matter how many pubs we've got, if we enacted this legislation, the first complaint will be from somebody who said, I hear that somebody in my company who's dumb enough to say, yes, that is what I said, was complaining about their school, saying there's any number of sexes and genders and you mustn't tell your children otherwise. What a load of old rubbish. I'm a parent who believes in two sexes. Some person will say, I was offended by that. I was offended and I was harassed and my employer didn't do anything to stop it. It was said in the canteen, it's ruined my life, I can't sleep anymore, I can't go to work there, I'm suing you. No, that'll be the first case.
May I just, what's interesting is the response from Conservative MPs, because Rishi Sunak is backing this amendment, apparently, to the Equality Act, but a lot of Tory MPs are really not pleased. Sir John Hayes said it had sinister implications. Craig McKinley said he believed the change was draconian. Lord Frost has said it's a woke socialist measure, chilling effect on every conversation in a workplace, which is what Alex was alluding to there.
We shouldn't, as the old saying goes, make the perfect the enemy of the good. And you know, in the example that Alex raises,
to stop messing around with legislation all the time.
Of course, it would be absurd if that kind of example were captured by it. But nonetheless, the truth is that people still do suffer harassment. Women go into pubs and restaurants. They're working in restaurants as waitresses, and they get those comments constantly, and they get that harassment. And I just think it's unfair to say to people, look, actually, even though a third party is doing this to you, and your employer has not taken reasonable steps, you can't hold that.
Let's just say firstly that most employers, I think, would take those steps just because they're, responsible human beings who aren't cruel.
Well, most employers will get it right without the need for legislation because they're trying to ensure that genuine harassment doesn't happen. But accepting your point, Paul, there is a flip side, which is, let's just take the corporate environment. The flip side is the extent to which businesses go around gold-plating beyond even what the legislation says to ensure that they are outside of any kind of liability. And businesses are pretty woke now. There's been a chilling effect on free speech in the workplace for a very long time already. Weaponise that with this kind of legislation, and before long, your HR department will be saying to you, because we need to avoid liability, we hereafter forbid these kinds of topics. Unless you think you're exempt from it, this has now been made clear to you. First time someone goes for a drink after work and says something...
Well, there you go. You'll need a much bigger HR department, which I think we've already got, the most HR employees in this country out of any other EU country or whatever per capita, I believe. Anyway, Marianne says the legislation would be crazy. Another woke idea. People who work in call centres often have rude customers. I used to tell the team, if a customer is rude, ask them politely to stop. If they don't, then hang up. Yes, this would be a massive thing in a call centre.
Yeah,
I mean,
quite.
people are constantly rude. But anyway, we've got to go. We'll come back to it. Coming up, a Tory MP has been criticised for boasting online about his Easter egg donations to charity, while also claiming nearly £300,000 last year in expenses. So, do you think we should keep charity donations to ourselves, not go flaunting them?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it is the start of the Easter weekend, so we have got a nice drink with us. Apparently, this is a tradition on Dewbs & Co.
Cheers.
There you go.
Cheers,
cheers, cheers, cheers.
And Michelle always necks it.
Yeah, Michelle gets rid of it immediately.
Straight down. She does that all the time.
No, she doesn't. You're lying to me.
Follow him.
Michelle would never down her glass of
Well, that's
Prosecco. Well, it's very nice indeed. Anyway, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company is Alex Dean, political commentator, and Paul Embry, firefighter and writer. So, our last topic of the day, it's an interesting one. Easter should, of course, be about being generous, I think. Tory MP has been criticised for boasting about his Easter egg donations to charities and at the same time claiming nearly £300,000 a year in expenses. So, the first question, is it hypocritical to make a fuss about this particular charity donation? But also, generally, should people, not show off when they're giving charitably?
Yeah, and that's part of the Christian tradition in the same way that you're not supposed to show off if you're fasting. But actually, the thing that exercises me most about this story is that suggestion of hypocrisy. Almost all claims made about MPs' expenses like this are nonsense. MPs' expenses, as categorised when you produce a figure like this, include the costs of running an office and paying for your staff, and it's almost never mentioned. And unless you point it out and really stress it, people come away from stories like this because they're about Easter eggs and a bit of froth. And
There
that's
he
the
is,
line
up
that
on
said,
the screen with his eggs. To be fair, I think he looks very nice and sweet there. He does, actually.
But
he looks proud of his eggs. Sorry,
Sure.
go on.
No, that's right.
Front row rugby player, nice and sweet.
Unless you emphasise, I'm going to struggle on manfully and finish this point.
Sorry.
Unless you really emphasise the fact that kind of line about expenses is a myth, then the thing that would go away in the back of someone's mind after they forget the Easter egg story is MP rinses the state for 300k, MP rinses the state for 300k, and it's not true.
So that's the staffing costs.
It's the staffing and the office and the travel. So actually, that's what really gets my goat about it. Whether or not he should be making a fuss on Twitter about having made an Easter egg donation, that's a matter of personal preference. But the claim about expenses is a matter of factual accuracy, and that really does annoy me.
Yes, so we don't know if he's spending this money on first-class flights to Doha or wherever, or Dubai. But Richard says anyone posting about charity work and donations on social media is primarily doing it for themselves, not for the actual cause itself. Very sad people. But, Richard, if you have a large social media following, which this MP does, surely it encourages people to be charitable.
Well, I'm not sure that was his reason for doing it, to be perfectly honest. And I agree with Alex. Look, if you're going to give to charity, I think it's much more meaningful if you do it privately. If you shout it from the rooftops, then it suggests that actually the reason you're trying to do it is because you're trying to win public approval. And I think that demeans the kind of point of giving to charity in the first place. I think giving to charity is a bit like morality. It matters when you think no one's looking. Morality matters when you think no one's looking. Giving to charity matters when you think...
It's a social media age, isn't it?
It is.
But just another question, sorry, Alex, but do you like it when it seems every shop, supermarket is now asking if you'd like to make a donation when you go to pay with your card? Do you think that's good, or do you think it's begging, or what sort of...
On the one hand, I find it annoying because I just want to get on with my purchase. On the other hand, I understand their kind of nudge theory and their belief that if people go around and think, well, I'll make up my charitable donations for myself, generally they don't. And it's good to have that opportunity, is their thoughts. But so I'm not particularly exercised by it. It's a micro annoyance when you're trying to do something. But people often misunderstand the expression, let not the left hand know what the right hand is doing. And I think we use it as an expression of, like, bad organisation. Oh, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. It's supposed to be, if you're doing good, if you're doing some good in society, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. If you're going off and making a charitable donation or something, it does seem tweeting about it rather stymies that Christian
There
spirit.
are people on TikTok who do, go to homeless people, give them a bag of goods, and of course they've got the video going and then to their hundreds of thousands of followers just to show how great they are, apparently. But it could encourage others to give donations. Julie has to say, just before we finish the show, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. Julie says, love your panel, both so sensible. So I don't think that encompasses me. Doesn't include me. Thank you all, she says. Thank you very much indeed. I hope everyone at home enjoys the Easter weekend. Have a lovely one.
Hello again. The fine weather many of us have had through today will continue overnight. That does mean it will turn chilly under largely clear skies, but then tomorrow brings plenty of dry and warm sunny weather, all because of high pressure which is dominating the picture across the UK, keeping fronts in the west at bay. But we are going to see this weak front trying to push its way in from the North Sea. Now that's going to bring a little bit more cloud to eastern and northeastern parts of the UK, and also some rain. Could turn a little bit heavy at times over eastern parts of Scotland overnight. Elsewhere, there'll be often clear skies, and under these clear skies, temperatures are going to take a bit of a dip. Whilst it won't be quite as cold as last night for most, it could still be a touch frosty for some, and watch out for a few patches of mist and fog in the south later in the night. For many then on Saturday, getting off to a bright start with